What's happening? Benton here. Well, it was 4 hours to the delivery, and I drove 2 hours. And I have this thing historically where I somewhat regularly check to make sure I have things like my cards, my debit cards, my ID, and such. And when I was getting fuel earlier, I'm bad about hitting the road instead of running in and washing my hands and my eyeballs. And since I was already at the fuel island, I got fuel before I rolled out. I went in the store and I thought to myself, well, I need some fifth wheel grease. It's good to have on hand. And I usually buy that with my Love's points. And, I'll talk myself out of it in the daytime because I don't like going in there and then, I just don't, I'm fully capable of waiting in line, but I prefer to wait until I know it's the opportune time. It's interesting because my gut was kind of telling me not to go in, but some of that is, well, are you just being lazy? Right. So I go in and I think I might have dropped my ID potentially because I remember kind of shuffling through my cards trying to find my Love's reward card. So I had all my cards in my hand. I guess I really need to start putting my ID somewhere else. I do the fanny pack. I do the fanny pack and I end up just pulling all my cards out. Or I thought, well, maybe I could have dropped it when I pulled all my cards out to get fuel potentially. That's also possible. So once I realize this, I've got that part of my brain that says, hey, make sure you got your cards. Now that should have kicked in as I was leaving the truck stop, but for whatever reason it didn't. And a lot of times that's, after I go to Walmart or whatever, a few minutes later, I'll make sure I got my debit card. And I'm one of those people, like one time I locked my keys in my car. And I did it once in trucking too, but I locked my keys in my car once. And, got in the habit of I'd pat my pockets. I'd make sure I had my keys before I locked my door and all these things. I'm real good at coming up with these systems and sticking to them, right? Um, so anyway, thankfully, it was only 2 hours later, and I'm looking through my fanny pack and no ID. Well, a lot of these shippers and receivers, you got to give them your ID, but I will say they're really good at giving them right back. And they probably don't want to deal with the hassles of, they probably don't want to deal with the hassles of, whatever that is, mad truckers because they didn't get their ID back. And so my thought was, I know they've asked me for my ID at some of these shippers and receivers. I have no way of remembering, it would be difficult for me to even remember all the places I've been recently, much less which ones. I'd have to call all of them, right? And I think what's happening is we're getting the sign that we're going to have to quit trucking, at least for now. because when my head's not in the game to this degree, and so now I'm backtracking 2 hours. Am I supposed to? It's going to be 4 hours round trip. Am I supposed to? Now I'm going to be late, and I don't even care. I mean, at this point, my ID is the most important. But and I think I'm skipping to I called the Loves because I said, well, I got to call them first. But, I'm assuming they don't have it, but they could have it. And shockingly, the person answered the phone, and this is where you know that this place isn't real and there's other forces at work, because he's immediately like, sounds like a white guy. He's on top of things. He's talking so fast I can't understand him. And I'm like, hey, can I talk to the manager? And he's like, yeah, we don't have one of those right now. I said, yeah, I kind of suspected who's the, what would be the closest thing to that? He said, well, that'd be me. I said, well, yeah, I also thought also as I suspected. And I said, hey, and always prepare the way, because people do this emotional labor, right? Where it's like the moment they hear a person has lost their ID, well, now they start, they imagine all sorts of scenarios, and they go through, they start to have all these emotions sort of on the other person's behalf, right? And I like to avoid that. So I'm trying to prepare the way, like, hey, I really just need to find out if you have it or if you don't, but is there any it's possible I may have dropped my ID up there earlier. It's possible. But the last thing I want to do is trigger, and I don't say this, but it's like, if at all possible, I want to avoid, now we're going to trigger a search, and now it's going to be just, oh my God, and, freaking out on the phone. And I've had this happen a lot, or just confusion around, well, we don't have a lost and found. And it's like, listen, I just need information, right? Like, I'm calling because somebody might have turned this thing in if I dropped it. All I need to know is, did this happen? Yes. I don't need emotional labor. I don't need freakouts. I'll deal with it. I just need to know, am I driving 2 hours back to Love's or not? That's all I need to know. And so it just, the chances of getting the person picks up the phone immediately and that's the guy. I think he said his name was Justin. And I'm trying to make sure he's going to be there when I get back. When I get there, I told him I'll be there in about 2.5 hours. So the GPS says 2 hours. And see, I don't even know if I can use the personal conveyance for this. Should I? I mean, this has nothing to do with truck driving at this point. So what am I supposed to do? Can they change it to personal conveyance later? I mean, I don't know. I mean, can they change it back to driving if they need to? I mean, is this an applicable use of the personal? I don't know. I have no idea if it is or not. I don't know if the company wants me doing 4 hours on the PC. I'm not going to call them and wake them up. I guess by the time I get there, they'll be awake. So I'll say, hey, I've already burnt 2 hours. Do you want me to burn 2 more, or PC it back to where I was when I turned around? But, and what's funny is, because, I think we all know that sort of panic of, realizing that you done fucked up. And, this is where I'm a little different than other people, is that my brain just immediately goes into practical problem solving. It's like, well, and I can't tell you how many times I've gotten away from something, realized that, oh, wait a minute, you don't have your thing, and then hustled back and retrieved it. It's happened a lot. And in homelessness, there's been a lot of times when I would leave something behind, and I had a pretty good track record of being able to go back for it. But there's a lot of times where that shit's just gone, and it's just gone. Like, I remember one time I left my 1 liter Nalgene water bottle in the Starbucks bathroom in Santa Barbara. And I realized within 10 minutes, I went back and it was just no sign of it. It was just gone forever. And that's such an important item. All I thought was, well, next time I got $10 and I get to one of the stores that sells these, I'm buying me another Nalgene water bottle, and I'll have to make do until then. And then, I get to thinking about, what do I got to do to go get another ID? And I'm thinking, well, I've got my birth certificate, but they also want, can't even remember if they'll accept your social security card or not. And then it's like, well, I do have a car registration, but then I don't own the car anymore, but they may not know that. And then I'm thinking, well, is it still valid? I think it is, and I already dug it out. It's good through, I think, middle of May, but, and just realizing like you can't really, like I can't rent a car. I can't rent a hotel room. I can't get on a Greyhound. I can't get on an airplane. Now, apparently it is possible. I've seen where it's theoretically possible to do a lot of these things without an ID, but the struggle would be so, well, I can't drive this truck without, some of these places they simply will not load me without my ID. Like I have to have it. It's mandatory. Now, the company might have preferred if I went and delivered this load first, which I understand, but I'm not leaving it up to, and I did everything but tell the guy, hey, man, I got a reward for you. Like I'm headed that way with money, But, and then thinking about, and immediately, of course, I'm framing this all in the context of, everything that I talk about on these live streams, and then with my own, increasingly sensitive internal space and how often I'm in meditation and sort of observing the panic, and at a certain point, just laughing, at my own dead flesh reaction to this. And, what now? And again, I have to go worst case scenario in my mind. It's how I deal with things. And, and that wasn't completely understood back during the active dying phase of my illness. So, the fact that I was able to recover without, and again, the medical system, they just do medical coding and billing. They don't fix anybody. Now, yeah, they're good at certain things, but I'm talking about like chronic illness. I'm not sure if a skilled surgeon can operate on my pancreas and Whipple procedure and remove some scar tissue and fix me that way. They're good at that sort of thing. The more mechanical aspects. As far as actually heal, they don't heal really. So the mentality of the person who's able to, rise up out of that chronic illness to the degree, and it's not, the battle's not, and I don't view it as a battle, but, it's not over with, right? But I've mostly recovered. I'd say I'm 85%. I'm definitely back to, I'm better than whatever I felt like before I even realized how sick I was, if that makes sense. But I don't even want to get into that. The point I'm making is, it was necessary for me to view it as if, hey, buddy, your body's dying, your organs are failing. If I didn't take it that seriously, I wouldn't have had the mentality of like, I have to do whatever I have to do to facilitate this healing, and which is exactly what I did. And then, surprise, surprise, the healing was received and continues to be received, And then what are these, what is it that the being, and it's not just me, but what is it that the being's tapped into that, thinks to check, and then, let's call it what it is. It is spiritual guidance and protection. And furthermore, I've been recognizing for a while now, there does seem to be some, the fates seem to be gently pushing me towards leaving trucking. But then, chances are I would go right back to it at some point, which is fine. But then it's like, okay, that sort of justifies, if it's justifiable to go back to it, it's justifiable to stay in it, if that makes sense. So, and then what's this part of, this so-called life where, my intuition is basically like, well, you're not going to be able to figure out if you gave it to a shipper or a receiver. And I'm almost every time that they handle it, if I can't remember them giving it back to me, meaning I was too spaced out to be paying attention, as I'm leaving, I almost always go into my fanny pack and physically look at my ID within 30 minutes, almost every time. Right. And, this is something I'm in the habit of, and it shows you here. Yeah, it took me 2 hours before I checked, but I basically checked, I would say 9 out of 10 times that I go into my fanny pack for my cards, I check at some point within the next hour or two, I check to make sure I got all my stuff. And there's a lot of times where I'll think, oh, wait a minute, where's my this card or that card? And it's like, oh, you put it in your, for some reason, you put all your cards in your pocket. Oh, for some reason, you put all your cards in the wrong pouch of the fanny pack, right? Or, oh, like your ID somehow got tangled up with your birth certificate and your medical card, DOT medical card. And so, it's funny because, again, observing my own reactions and then recognizing, I can talk about not paying taxes and I can talk about, various other things, but, look at what happens just because I didn't have an ID temporarily, right? And I don't have it, and in my world, until I get there and they put it in my hand, it doesn't exist. It's not a part of my world until I get back there. And I'm not saying this will happen and I'm not manifesting, but, I've known of multiple truck stops that burned to the fucking ground, right? Now that's extremely unlikely, and those were both in Texas during the summer, but, and this is where sort of we see the conventional wisdom and the assumption, bright siding and the look at the bright side and the, so-called common sense. People would just say, well, of course, you did the right thing. You called the last place you knew you most likely had your ID and exposed it to potential loss or loss, right? And surprise, surprise, they had it. So chill out and everything's going to be fine. It's like, well, yeah, probably. And I'm not taking that. That has to become my reality. It's not my reality at this time. And then all the thoughts triggered in my own head and my own spirit around, well, you know what? I'm no account anyway. Right. What's up, Chad? I see y'all down there. We'll try to keep a chat for the moment. And, I feel bad sometimes because the good folks get punished and the evildoers just move on to the next place and go shit up somebody else's chat. So they don't, it's neither here nor there for them. Right. So I don't know, maybe I'll experiment with turning the chat back on, but then at some point, StreamYard just needs better tools for dealing with this realistically. But shout out to you guys. And the number of times this sort of thing's happened, I remember my first ever music show I went to was a Social Distortion at Riverfest in Little Rock, Arkansas, a night show at the amphitheater there, nearby where the Clinton library is these days, in presidential library. not too far from there. And, crowd surfing and slam dancing and all of that was real big. And I did some crowd surfing and my fucking wallet, no, my keys fell out of my pocket and I drove. I can't even remember which ones of my bozo friends came with me, but and I mean, I'd have been fucked. This was I'd have been just wandering Little Rock all night until to get a hold of my parents. And maybe my wallet too. I don't even remember the wallet side of things, but definitely my car keys. I guess both of them fell out of my pockets because, a young kid, teenager, I'm not even thinking baggy shorts. I was fairly skinny anyway. Or baggy shorts or baggy pants as it was. And so once my crowd surfing's over with, somebody walks up to me, taps me on the shoulder and hands me my shit. I said, what the fuck? They said, yeah, man, here's your stuff. And it was like, I was like, just, realizing I'd have been just totally fucked. And I didn't even know what to do other than just, thank you, thank you, thank you. And probably didn't have any money to get. Now, and again, I found people's wallets and turned them in, and been there because they came right back for it or whatever. And a lot of people sort of expect that reward, and I don't like that moment where, I don't like that moment to where, I'm there and then you can see them realize, well, wait a minute, am I expected to give a reward? Is that the expectation? It's like, I just tell them, no, man, I'm good. I don't need anything. Meanwhile, I was homeless without a lot of money last time it happened in Echo Park, Los Angeles. But I just don't even like that. It's like, if he doesn't carry cash, that's fine. He's free to insist if he wants to. I don't know his financial situation. I'm not doing it for the reward, right? That's not the reason that I'm doing it. Let me make sure I'm going to the right place here. Yeah. I'm going to double check just out of my own. It's funny, I pulled up my Google Maps and it was right there on the screen because I think I'd been looking at I kept hearing a train and I was like, what the fuck? I didn't realize there was train tracks. So I was looking at the satellite view and I was like, yeah, sure enough, there's some train tracks back there near the truck stop. And, I don't want to, but see, between this and I went to the wrong place. If anybody remembers that, I drove let's just call it 4 hours. I drove a total of 8 extra hours. Here I am driving 4 extra hours. I guess I'm gonna have to call the owner and just say, hey man, this is what's going on. I don't know, man. If you want to keep going, I guess I'm happy to keep going, but it's getting fucking weird. I'm good, but I told you when you hired me that I smoke weed sometimes, and I'm not even going to bring it up, but I told him you can drug test me anytime you want. So I don't know, if I was him, I'd probably be like, let's go ahead and rando that dude. I don't fucking know. And I think some of this is, the internal bootstrapping, whatever that ascension is, the resurrection of the risen, ascended Christ. I think some of that is just, it ain't fucking important. It's like, yeah, I have to have an ID to do certain things, which is, considered like the most important activities. And really it's, what does a 50-year-old man do? who's still in the workforce, a lot of what I do, you have to have an ID to do it, and it's required. And then recognizing this idea of power, and I keep talking about where is power and meaning accessible, where is it not accessible, and then I talk about this realm will only ever treat what I am as if it's guilty of something, and speaking on the nature of blessing and the nature of curse, and and then to temporarily be separated from hopefully it's temporarily. I mean, again, it's not. It's. I think we all see it's pretty good chance of it being there when I get there. And I don't beat myself up over this. And this is, a lot of people do. It's look, everybody makes it's a mistake. It's an error. You know. Yeah, I'm really. This is, and I don't think I've ever just lost my ID ever. Now, see, this was so. Let's say that wherever it got dropped, um, you know, whether out at the fuel or inside or wherever. Hell, I might have left it on the counter, and I'm a little out of it sometimes. I'm head in the clouds. I'm fully capable of just leaving that bitch on the counter where maybe the clerk can't see it, and the next person that comes up is like, "Hey, look, there's somebody's ID here." It's like, all right, well, we'll see if he notices, right? I know at least once in Echo Park, I left my car keys at Lassen's, my hippy dippy grocery store, and I wasn't locking my car door because I didn't want to run the battery down. I was starting my car like every 2 weeks and letting it run for like 45 minutes to keep the battery charged up. Because turning those power locks on and off 100 times a day runs the battery down too fast. And I never did get one of them booster pack things, but either way, and it's better not to run your battery down anyway in a car. But again, back to the padding my pockets. I didn't get 20 minutes away. It was like, well, hustle back, and they either got them or they don't. And I think I might have paid with some change. Probably just pulled all the change and my keys out of my pocket and dumped it all onto the counter, and then started counting the change probably, and just never retrieved my keys, and ran right back and they were there. And this is a version of that, except it's going to be 4 hours after I left it there, closer to 5 probably, and then 5 hours, and then whatever the company says. And at this point, I got to be honest, man. And that's not the right phraseology, because they're like, "Oh, always be honest." Well, number one, no. How's that going to work? This world doesn't want that truth. But and I'm not saying to tell lies, but yeah. And then what would that look like if I was to step away from trucking? And I think I would just be like, "Look, man, we got to make some kind of arrangement on this money, because I already know this guy's going to pay me out all the money, mostly because he just doesn't want to deal with me. Because later on, I could always just say, well, I could go to the labor board and it wouldn't be worth his time. It's just, it's easier for him to just pay me whatever I've worked, whatever they have my wages. It's easier just figure out how much you want for me to drive this thing to Chicago empty, or find a load to Chicago, whatever, let's just work it. But I don't want to do I'm either going to quit. I don't want to do this where I'm going to haul freight for 2 more weeks. And then, by then I'll probably talk myself out of, I either need to leave now or I need to fucking figure out how to put my head back in the game. Because my head, now I'm always good for driving, but my head ain't in the game otherwise. It's just really not. And, I've already got a pretty healthy dose of I don't give a fuck, but I don't give a damn if this, I just don't care. It's not my concern if this load's late. And if the company, if they're like, well, that's really unfortunate. I said, yeah, man, but my ID is more important than this freight getting delivered. I hate to break it to you. I mean, it just is what it is. I don't know what to tell you. And from a trucking standpoint, they know I literally can't do my job. Maybe there's a version of getting the DMV to, send over the paper copy or email the paper copy or whatever. But, in the long run, I have to have you have to have it. It's mandatory to do what we're doing here, but there is no long-term solution. And I'm realizing now the money and the savings and, that's sort of a Band-Aid to just kind of exist, not driving a truck. It's basically subsistence, to survive on a minimum of resources. Because, I was still in the glow and the kind of the honeymoon phase of the, unlocking the achievement of true knowledge of self/self-realization. There's a bit of a honeymoon period. And I recognize that. So, let's say I had about 9 G's, I think, total when I quit that Sun Transportation Systems. And I think I went through that in about 60 days, which, it's funny because that sounds kind of crazy, but it really, if you think about it, if you're just going to go, if a person's just going to go live their life, with a car and take road trips and continue to, buy whatever they decide they need and, stay in hotels and motels much of the time. And, that's just what happens. And it might have been 3, I don't know, whatever the time period was. And of course, as the money got less and less, then I started making it last longer. But I'd say it was 2 months, and then I got down to an amount of money where I was like, all right, it's time to batten down the hatches. And, I would argue it's actually healthy for people to do that on occasion if they're able to. Just like I went and had a beer and a shot and a pizza recently, that I would argue that's actually, I'm not advocating alcohol. I'm just saying doing whatever a version of that is for the person, And so I've done so much with quitting jobs and having money. And then what I've noticed is every time I quit, I live less and less frugally. So, when famously during the pandemic, when that crazy person shot up my car in Texas, like for real in front of me, put fucking rounds into the back of my Nissan Versa. And, crazy. What a time. I might retell that story, but I've kind of lost interest in it. But it's still kind of fascinating. Again, waking dreams, surrealistic, unreality, deja vu all over again. And then, see, here's another problem in trucking is you got drivers who do this sort of thing just because they know, once they get to where they sort of know what's going to happen with the scheduling. And, this is like, they have no way of knowing unless they call the Loves even let's say they call the Loves tomorrow, that person might not even work there anymore. They may or may not even be able to get the information like, hey, did this really happen? Like I halfway want to say, hey man, here's $40. And if you don't mind, like real quick, I want to get some evidence. I want to get you on recording saying that this happened because, at a certain point, would I believe me, right? And you definitely have truckers that will just, and it's probably not always, but it's probably more the live in the truck types because remember, everybody else is trying to get home. But, and get run ragged and just malingering, right? Malingering, fake an illness or fake a breakdown or, oh, hey man, I don't know how I drove to fucking Fargo, but look, it just happened to work out in my favor, right? I was tired. I told the guy and I was like, hey man, I'm not involved in logistics, but, we might want to just go ahead and finish this 34 and I'm tired anyway. So, and I'm pretty sure this seems like the type of load where they're not going to give a fuck if I wait and deliver it in the morning. So, and he called around and found out that was okay. Some people will, once people figure out that that's possible, there's absolutely drivers that will do all that shit intentionally. And then, we get into the more nuanced versions of the subconscious mind. And again, the waking dream, surrealistic aspects, unreality, it's part of my own being doing this itself. And then you get without me knowing it. And then because certainly that intelligence exists within me somewhere to understand on some level, whether or not it ever enters my conscious mind, there's something in me that understands that, there's a possibility that if I just drive to the wrong fucking, but it's on the bills. So that my company can't really say anything other than, hey man, always check with us if you're not sure. And I said, exactly. I would have checked with you, except I was sure. And I was 100% certain I was supposed to go to Fargo instead of some little town in South Dakota. I don't know why. I've never done that. This is the first time in trucking I've misplaced my ID while I was working. I'm a very serious person when it comes to how I approach the job. Very, very serious. And then you get into the undiagnosed fake autism aspects and the neurodivergence. I mean, this is like almost an unforgivable sin, and now it's not that, but it feels like it to a person with perfectionistic tendencies is like, holy shit. But then again, I've accepted, my own fallibility in that way. It's just other people lose their shit as far as their ID or whatever. And it's just, you can tell they're just this is just sort of what they do. Every year or two, they lose their fucking wallet. It's just kind of what they do. It's like, I don't ever lose mine. And, early on, having that experience at that music show, that probably burned something in my brain around, hey, buddy, like you got really lucky this time. And it seemed like luck back then. I look back on it now and realize that was spiritual guidance and protection my whole life, by the way. And, I can't encourage anybody, because I don't even consider this religion because all religion is man-made and therefore demonic. But, part of my own, if you want to call it a Jesus trip or whatever you want to call it, is at some point with all the meditation and the spiritual practices, I could not fool myself around. I absolutely have been spiritually guided and protected my whole life. Now, I'm coming to understand that's actually worshiper and object of worship contained within the same space. The kingdom of air quotes so-called God is within me, right? And, then some of this ties into concepts around free will. And, I'm a big free will guy, but it's contextual because I'm beginning to really understand that in certain contexts, free will is not a thing in the way that humans tend to intellectually approach the concept of free will. And that's where some of this, the ideas of these internet debates and some of these, big brains that want to talk about the nature of free will and is that even a thing in the first place? Well, and I don't know that they would want to engage with the lay people because I'm pseudo intellectual. I'm not an actual intellectual. You take a lay person who's interested in intellectual concepts, that does not an intellectual make. All right. I would argue that you also need the big brain, and I don't have the big brain. Now I got something going on, but it ain't the big brain. It's more of an idiot savant type of thing than anything else. It's not a high IQ big brain, thank God. Thank you, Jesus. It ain't that. But probably just going to have some kind of convo with the owner of the company. This is like three things that have happened. I hit that rock at that truck stop and banged the truck up. I still owe. I still got to pay the owner, and that's based on my own principles, $250. Now I'm not paying for the fucking fender. I mean, I don't know what to tell him on that. I mean, I guess if he insisted, but I'm not going to offer to pay for the bumper. I'll pay for whatever whatever the company had to pay to keep me rolling. I'll pay for that. But, I don't know. So back to the free will. I mean, back to the Jesus part of it. So part of my own willingness to, again, what we're talking about here is spiritual surrender. Well, eventually I had no choice, but in order to continue down a certain path with my own development, I had to accept that I was protected and guided my whole life. And, initially it was sort of a lot of things I read about or used to read about, the idea of guardian angels and, and again, I think we're looking at a framework to understand these things, right? And as as John 14:26 has taken more and more effect, the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, teaching me all things and bringing unto my remembrance, some of that stuff sort of falls away to the side, falls by the wayside, but, especially early on, some of these concepts are helpful. But the key for me was, I was going through some things in my journeys, and at a certain point I walked, and, this is hard to tell this story without giving way too much background, but if anybody's not aware, and I doubt that, I assume all of the listeners know, I immersed myself in homelessness back in 2012 and didn't have to. Strictly speaking, probably would have ended up there anyway. Let's just call it what it is. But I transitioned into it via a vagabond lifestyle that involved learning, adjusting to so-called urban camping very early, things that have become popular. I was something of an early adopter. If we look at them through the lens of social media and we look through them at the lens of certain ideas being promoted to the larger public, and urban camping is, not necessarily a term that everybody knows, but it's this is something of a well-known topic, so living out backpack, traveling around, sleeping rough, years spent waiting in line for freebies as a homeless person, but just not. The only difference is mostly going city to city and doing that. And so some areas of the country, there's less of that. Some areas of the country, there's more of that. Um, while traveling, there tends to be more of a, hold the cardboard sign for an hour or two. And some areas won't just, some areas there's no donators, and other areas donate so much that it only takes an hour or two. So like, well, now here's the money. And then food stamps, of course. I was on food stamps for years, and people can have their own opinion. Again, that's just not my concern what people think about that. You know, I've got my own counter arguments ready, mostly involving, number one, the taxpayer don't give a flying fuck what's done with their money. So I don't want to hear, so you don't mind being a burden on society. It's like, well, first you're going to have to establish that, $200 or more a month for food in my belly is a drain on society. Like I'm not accepting that, so we're going to have to go ahead and have that debate. But where I will start is clearly based on their actions. The taxpayer don't give a flying fuck how their money's spent. So I will not internalize guilt and shame around the idea of, so-called being on the dole. Well, it's like, yeah, I understand in a community, certain people may express disapproval around an able-bodied, otherwise employable adult male getting food stamps. However, the taxpayer proves through their actions they don't give a fuck what the government. They just don't care what the government does with their money. So, I don't want to hear it. So, did you talk to the criminal? I ain't the criminal. And so we're treating the people. The system determines who gets what, and then the people want to treat the people who get certain things as if they're criminals. It's like, no, go talk to the actual criminals. Go talk to the government. Why are you talking to me? Right. And, let's just call it what it is. And this is probably part of the internet thing. I probably need to just start traveling around preaching all of this, now to do it Jesus style is somebody else is going to have to handle the money. Somebody else is going to have the driver's license. Somebody else is going to have to drive the car, right? Because, there's really no doing that. And so I got a foot in one world and, I got one foot in one world and one foot in the other world, really. That's really what we're talking about here, because part of me was hoping my ID was gone. And I'm for real. Part of me was, while recognizing, I have to do, I have to call, and if they have it, I have to go back and this is the necessities. And again, it's absurd, right? These are the absurd necessities of the performance, right? This is all built into the performance. But, I've sort of been waiting for the system to force the shitter to get off the pot moment, which is fine. But then why am I letting the system determine that? I didn't fully let the system determine when I transitioned into a homeless vagabond lifestyle. Now, it contributed because of the bailouts and, the economic factors. This wasn't that long after 08, 09. And my life with my very, again, I won't even describe it. The life I was living became less comfortable because of economic factors. And I chose another way because I knew my time would actually be better spent. And so, and this says something about the dead flesh. As long as employment was willing to give me what I consider to be enough money for me to do whatever I wanted to do at the time to live a certain type of so-called life, I was happy to go work at a gas station, and for the wifey poo to work at the Clinique counter at the mall. This already sounds like a former life when you start talking about a mall, somebody earning a good wage at a mall. She probably averaged $700 a week after taxes at the which is for Fort Smith, Arkansas in 2011. That's pretty fucking good money. It really is. That's 25%. If she wanted to live in a shithole, she could absolutely have her own room, rent her own room, and that'd be a quarter of her income. Now, it wouldn't be a nice place, but That's hypothetically, if a person's frugal, that's enough money for one person to live on at the time. Is it who's working at the fucking mall these days? And she made more than that some weeks. I'd say it averaged out to around 700. So between the two of us, $1,000 a week, 1,100 a week, 1050 a week to the pocket. But once we started getting squeezed, and I'm going too much into that, but so here's what happened with the Jesus trip is when I transitioned to that vagabond lifestyle, and many years of that went by, and this was fairly early on, though. This would have been within the first 3 years, and I'm bad with time, right? I definitely still had most of my muscles. I used to have muscles. I used to have a pretty decent amount of size on me. And, rootin' tootin', mid 30s, full of testosterone. And still am full of testosterone, and again, these various practices, the meditation, living a certain type of way. And I walked. So I left out of Portland, Oregon, and I took the West Coast. They have a lot of, one transit system will connect to the next transit system. So, for example, and this may still be possible, I'm not exactly sure, but, for example, one time I took a Greyhound to LA and then walked at like 4 a.m. to a bus stop in LA. And I took a bus to like Ventura or Camarillo or somewhere, and eventually got to Santa Barbara, spent a few months there, and then left Santa Barbara. And because I wanted to bypass San Jose. I ended up going to Santa Cruz on interconnecting bus systems. And then I walked. And I later found out it's actually, there's buses available there at the time. You could bus your way up the coast. So I ended up at a certain point. I walked from, I want to say Davenport. I walked from there to like 10 miles south of Half Moon Bay. And I knew from experience, once you get to Half Moon Bay, you can get to San Francisco via Daly City on the transit. And that's where I was going, at least for the time being. And I think I eventually got all the way to Eugene, probably. And I had a lot of fun traveling like that. It was a lot of fun. So at a certain point, I'd been in Portland for a while, and I decided I wanted to go north, but I didn't want to just, you could take the fucking, the Bolt bus, they used to call it. I think it's maybe the Flix bus now. If anybody's ever heard of Megabus, it's the West Coast version it used to be the West Coast version of the Megabus. And so you can go to Seattle on the Megabus or on the Bolt bus back then, but I didn't want to do that. And something was telling me so I took the transit to Castle Rock, Washington. It's as far as I could figure out to get. And then I said, well, fuck it. It's like 100 miles to Seattle. I'll just walk the rest of it. And so I walked from Castle Rock to the south side of Seattle, except the cops gave me a ride for like 15 miles because there's a military base out there. And I walked into some well-to-do, nice kind of conservative. I don't remember the town, and I, basically sleeping, walking, drinking water. It was summertime, smoking some weed here and there. Just sort of scrounging, had food stamps and just kind of whatever, and sleeping under the stars mostly at night. And so the cops picked me up because I walked into the Starbucks and I could tell, man, my aggression levels and just my beingness and my testosterone. And I could tell based on how people were reacting to me. I said, you know, this ain't something's going to happen. So somebody called the cops. The cops showed up. I said, listen, man, here's what it is. I'm walking. This is not my destination. I don't give a fuck about being here. Clearly, the locals don't want me here. If y'all want to give me a ride up out of here, that's fine with me. Let's just, whatever, man. Help me help you, basically. And so they drove me to a transit center, and I think I just walked. I think they dropped me off in, hard to remember, but Federal Way. I know I came through Federal Way, but that might have been. And then I walked to the south side. And as soon as I hit city of Seattle bus system, I thought to myself, well, they might just let me ride the bus for free. And the bus stops to take me downtown. And I'm trying to explain to the bus driver, hey, I don't have the fare, but, if you don't mind, could I ride and blah, blah, blah. And he was so just like, yeah, man, just get on. I guess he was behind schedule, and he's basically looking at me like I'm crazy. Like, because as we know, like half the people don't pay in the first place. Half the people just climb on the back of the bus and don't ever pay. Right. So he's looking at me like I'm nuts. And he's like, yeah, man, just get on the bus. Let's go, man. I'm like, all right, okay, my bad. So during all of that, I remember I slept in a field next to a truck stop. And I remember something happened in my consciousness, in my spirit. And again, a lot of this is from the notion of spiritual guidance and protection. And I said, look, man, and I, of course, had my own issues with religion and all of these things. I said, listen, I don't know. We talk about Jesus and Christ and the Bible and all this. I said, listen, here's what I'll do. I committed and said, if you call out to me talking to Jesus, I will answer the call. That's all. And that's all I said. I said, that's it. That's the entirety of what I'm committing to here. And then shortly thereafter, I had a direct experience of Christ, and my own, whatever Saul of Tarsus claimed to experience on the road to Damascus. And I don't take his word for it, and I don't expect anybody to take my word for it, but I had my version of that. Now, people have asked, every once in a while, somebody asks me about it. I say, well, I don't see things in my mind. Like I'm one of these people. I don't have visuals in my head. Now I dream visually, but I don't see stuff in my brain, and I don't hear voices. I have perceptions and thoughts. So I had a direct perception of Christ, and that I can't explain to you, because I can't explain to you how I perceive phenomena within my own beingness, right? And, looking back on it, it's probably actually some aspect of myself, again, worshiper and object of worship contained within the same space, is probably something that I was blocking through the subversion of the creative force of what I am by, again, means of assertion, aggression, and dominance. I was probably creating a blockage and an obstacle, but within myself. And so when that obstacle is no longer perpetuated on an ongoing basis, when the being stops creating those blockages, then they vanish, right? And then there was a direct experience of what I would refer to as Christ's consciousness. And I've trained myself, and I've had enough intentional psychedelic experiences, and I've had some very vivid dream experiences, lucid dreaming and things at times. And I read a book on lucid dreaming as a teenager, and I got fairly good at extending the lucid dream. And a lot of that is to understand, in an experience like that, the moment the person tries to covet the experience and grasp it and hold on to it, it immediately vanishes. And so when something like that's happening, I understand that my only role as far as the dead flesh is to just not do anything that's going to prematurely end the experience. And this is also the same thing that causes the majority of bad psychedelic trips. It's the intervention of the dead flesh seeking to, maybe, I want this to be over with. It's to provide resistance. Well, remember, what I am is not capable of putting up a resistance. See? And again, that's the same force that, as far as I can tell, provides the guidance and the protection. The guidance and the protection is always there. It's the individual blocks it from coming in, right? Like under how I understand the concept of free will, everybody has the right to create those blockages and to continue to affirm those blockages. So the reality is, whatever's keeping me in trucking, whatever's keeping me living, and the title of this stream is No Account, whatever's keeping me living as if and again, it's not life, whatever keeps me pretending as if, and it is a process of false identification, right? I mean, that's what it is. And so I'm actually creating my own barrier to the level up, right? I'm creating my own barrier to that by continuing to operate as if I have these accounts. And then, so what's been Benton's attraction to, not having a car? Because part of me was happy when I sold my car. Now, meanwhile, I liked that car. That was a good car. It doesn't matter. But there's a reason why I'm attracted. And yeah, I've been considering buying another car, but at a certain point, it's like, hey, I've been there and I've done that. I've left trucking and came back to trucking. I've left trucking and I've come back to trucking. So at what point does the being go to the next level, which is to continue to operate at whatever level trucking and my own automobile and a driver's license, and I would say all of that is to behave as if the being has an account. And I grew up as a young person, and I always heard in the South, and some of this was in movies, and some of this was just the old folks. And, for me, old folks would have been anybody age 35 or older when I was a child, but no account. They'd say, well, he's no count, right? And that means no account. So and what is that? That goes back to the olden days of farming, right? And, pay script once the company takes over. But then, in the farming communities, a lot of people end up dependent on, will the local merchant at the general store give them credit or not? See? And so their account is either good or no. They either have an account down at the general store, or they don't. And if they don't, they're no count, meaning, well, that's a person who, they're tapped out. We don't accept them in the larger society. They're no good. See? And so what I'm learning and accepting is the spirit of what I am, as long as the dead flesh and the performer known as Benton, as long as and the mechanism exists to where the individual always has the option of doing whatever they're capable of doing to earn money, to maintain a driver's license, right? To have these maybe have a credit rating, maybe have a credit card if that's what they're into. Some people have to have a new vehicle, right? And then there's been some of us who do our own versions of that, paying cash for cars, paying at times for an entire year of car insurance. But again, what did Jesus do in the Bible? Well, he was baptized, began his ministry. And I want to be clear, this direct experience of Christ, spiritually, that was to receive baptism in the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost. Because remember, the KJV calls it Holy Ghost. And then other translations say Holy Spirit. And guess what? That's a my cup runneth over. That expression of baptism in the Holy Spirit, that is a worshiper and object of worship contained within the same space. That's a flow and a bringing forth and an ascension within the individual, right? Which doesn't even exist in the first place. That's what that is, right? And it's like a fountain overflowing, like up and out, right? So it seems to be coming from outside, but it's actually, if you think of a chakra system, you think of the spine, you think of the 7 chakras, and yeah, I understand there's probably more, but the 7 main chakras. And I know a lot of y'all ain't into chakra talk. Well, Benton has a lot of experience with chakras. I have chakras. I don't know what the fuck you have. That's not my business. I don't care. Don't know. Have at it. Don't care. Not my concern. Not concerned. You can laugh in my face when I say chakra. Don't care. I know what I know. Not my problem. Do whatever you want. Believe me, I'm from a place and a time when chakra talk would not have been tolerated whatsoever. I understand that a lot of the folks that listen to me historically, they're not into chakra talk. But simultaneously, a lot of those same folks are now on social media where their own peer groups, and even if they themselves consider that witchcraft, a lot of their own peer groups are starting to get into those sort of dynamics. But what happens through the peer groups probably does end up being, representative of witchcraft on some level, or, Aleister Crowley type shit. And I myself fell victim to some of that, but that's not the point of what I'm on about now. That's sort of a side issue, but man, I got to take a piss. I don't think I can make another hour without pissing. But uh, so it's basically like, and I don't want to describe it too much, but I want to stick to what I can remember that I know that I experienced. And that, so I think that's the chakra system is a helpful thing to use to attempt to explain what I'm talking about with baptism in the Holy Spirit. But then what can't happen is for somebody else to then hear a description and then to seek to receive that experience, because it's got to be different for everybody else. Some people probably do hear a voice. Some people probably do see a vision. Like I didn't have none of that. This was direct experience. Within the context of my own beingness, right? And I've tried to leave trucking a bunch of times, and I didn't do this stream to to say, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, because I know in the past I've said, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and then half the time I don't do it, or most of the time I don't do it. And so I'm not even going to say what will or won't happen, because how do I know? I don't fucking know. I can't call it. And I only even share the Christ side of the discussion because that is spiritual surrender. And what I've said at a certain point, I came to understand that to refuse to spiritually surrender, that prevents spiritual victory. So if what I am is spiritual victory, then if there is no spiritual surrender within myself in service of what I am on behalf of what I am, if there is no yin to that yang, then the result of that is to be cut off from blessing. So no to refuse to surrender is to cut oneself off from blessing. So now we see that religion has prevented a lot of people, myself included for many years, just the damage wrought through the example and the direct traumas of religion, which is man-made, demonic, and certainly has caused way more harm than it ever did good. Religion, and this is, probably going to be, this is probably going to be, if the preaching that I'm beginning to suspect is going to start happening, if that's the way forward, and that's probably not even the right way to think about it, but it's probably going to be something that's going to be interpreted as a criticism or critique of specifically Christianity, right? And then what do we have in America? Oh, you got Somali pirates, right? You got Somali pirates, pirating the fucking funds that are supposed to go to the disadvantaged or whatever through fraud. It's like, yeah, I understand there's a religion called Islam. I'm not the one to provide critiques of that. That's just, I will, if I need to. However, I'll be coming from the Christian perspective of things as a person who doesn't identify as a Christian. And again, it's above my pay grade what happens after that. That's up to the larger. See, that's not Benton's concern. The seemingly individuated being, right, entrapped or encased in the dead flesh. That's not his concern. His concern is, that's air quotes so-called God's concern. Again, within delusion, because within this delusory realm, it would be silly for me to not refer to these concepts within the framework of delusion. It'd be silly not, especially using the English language, conveying ideas perhaps to an audience, right? And then, now the trick here is going to be, if this happens, so we're brainstorming, the Royal We's brainstorming and spitballing. So the key to this is, necessarily there would be the assistance of others, right? And so to perform whatever the function is, right, again, on behalf of the spirit of what I am, in service of the spirit of what I am, for its purposes, and some of that based on the delusions and the limitations of the individual, at least initially, a lot of that's simply not going to be, I've kind of lost my train of thought. Sorry about that, but my apologies. In the preaching I have done in the physical, it's definitely been spontaneous and inspired, and I do a pretty good job of not inflicting a lot of form onto it necessarily, and really that is what that's what I'm made to do. If you look at the Bible and every man hath not the same office, and most of us wear many hats and all of this, and that's all fine and good, but you know I still talk about my great grandmother, Mrs. Buffington, on my mom's side, and that she was a spiritual woman in her way, in her own way, and one of the few Leos we've had in our family that I've been able to find out about. And I got to go visit her some. I definitely got to spend some time with her. And so this is my now 90-year-old, I think she's 91, my grandmother on my mom's side. This was her mother. And so she would have been in Arkansas, in Benton, Arkansas, of all places. That's where she lived. And it reminds me of the Judy Bats. Me and my best friend were into alternative music, and I wasn't a big Judy Bats fan. Wasn't angry enough for me, but they had a song or maybe an album. It was Down by the Shacks Where the Satellite Dishes Grow. And that's the perfect description for where my great grandmother lived in Benton, Arkansas. You literally drove over an old rickety wooden bridge to get there. You can't, some of this you just can't make it up. And I say I'm from the Delta and I'm from Arkansas. It's almost, at times, I was in environments that it may as well have been, oh brother, where art thou? If we've all said, I'm like, for real. Like, some of my very early experiences, it was pretty fucking close to a version of, because, that was in Mississippi, other side of the river. And it may as well have been what you saw depicted in that movie. And, the kid, remember, they came to that Wash, I think his name was. And remember, Wash's son came out there with the rifle and was like, state your business. And, he's telling them what's going on. He talked about he nicked the census man, and they said, there's a good boy. I grew up in a world where that was still present, but it was falling away, like for real. And so I'm assuming my great grandmother, that was probably some of her experiences, was that type of world, Well, and part of this was, I'm sure, the Jehovah's Witness thing. I think we showed up, and I was never a Jehovah's Witness, but, I was in my Sunday best, in my little suit. I was probably 10, I don't know, 10 years old or whatever, with my book bag. And I remember, and I was, tiny little kid, and I remember looking down at me and, kind of pinching my cheeks and giggling, and something about, I can't really hear her voice, but, something about, we got us a preacher, and I know she saw that spirit, right? There's something in her, that saw that in me, right? And she certainly would have been intelligent enough not because of the carrying a book bag, and for whatever reason, we went and visited my mom's side of the family, probably on a Sunday. And at a certain point, one of my older cousins, Rance, I had a cousin, Rance, that I knew a little bit. He flopped out on the floor speaking on tongues at a certain point. I guess that was their answer to the Jehovah's Witnesses. And fair enough. Whatever. Motherfuckers fell out flopping on the floor, rolling their eyes back in their head, speaking on tongues. That happened. What talking about waking dreams, surrealistic unreality, deja vu all over again. Goodness gracious. What a disaster. And and I know the times I've done it, it's just like effortless. It just seems like it just pours out of me, but not in a way where it makes me look for opportunities to experience that. It's just, to live a certain type of so-called life to facilitate that. And there was some of that going on in LA. Unfortunately, LA, it has its ways of sort of diverting some of that off into political and ideological uh, discussion, right? And in reality, it would probably be a more of a preaching, to my own so-called people down south, which, like it or not, they kind of have to accept me on some level. I mean, it's not really. That's just. And some of y'all may know what I mean. Culturally, it's like, yeah, I am y'all, right? Yeah, I'm different. I'm weird. I'm this. I'm that. That's fine. I'm the same as y'all. Um, I was in West Memphis, and I was driving down the road, and I spotted a black fella walking with a gas can. I said, "Well, shit, I might as well pick him up." This is when I was on my way to when I was still looking for a truck driving job, and I was on my way to Chicago because I was pretty sure whoever I ended up working for was going to be in Chicago. I was taking my time, scooped him up, just pulled over. I pulled into the turning lane, a forward lane with a turning lane. Hey man, I can carry you up to the gas station. I just assumed his car was out of gas. Well, it turned out his wife, she took it. She took the truck that day for whatever reason, and he's got to mow the yard, not because she told him to, but um, but that's what he's doing. He's not working that day, and I don't think he had any money. He was in the store a long ass time. I think he had to hustle. And this is, I ain't black, man. I'm not from hustle culture. I don't, whatever was involved in him hustling up a gallon of gas. I don't know, but it took him about 20 minutes, and I waited on him in the car and carried him back to his house. And which was interesting because I had thoughts of, if I want to keep this car, I was pretty sure I was going to have to find a place to store it. So I already was thinking that way. And so this is how manifesting works. I'm almost certain this guy would have let me, because he had a bunch of vehicles in a cul-de-sac. He lived in a pretty nice neighborhood, but this is where you get into, where I'm from, and Memphis is similar. And this is West Memphis, but it's effectively Memphis in certain ways. It's a different state, it's just across the river. But um, I'm almost certain he would have let me leave my car there. Now, what happened after that, who knows? But we would have stayed in contact, and really, I would have just left it long enough to say, "Hey, man, I'm going to start this job, and then I'm going to figure out where I'm going to keep it long term." I said, basically, I just need to be able to. I know I can get from here to the Greyhound in Memphis, and you know, um, I can take the bus up to Chicago, and once I find a job, they'll come pick me up, and then within a week or two, I'll figure out what to do with this car, right? And that, I'll happily give him whatever money he wants once I start getting paid. And again, I'm pretty sure he would have went for it. And something told me just not to even bother. And part of that was I really was. Part of me wanted to get rid of the car at that point, and not that specific car, just to not have a car. But that's kind of what I mean, man. And it wasn't weird to either one of us. It was just totally natural. And, he was kind of like, "What are you doing?" And I was just kind of told him that I've been sleeping in my car and I've been out in LA. And, now I'm going to go back to trucking. And, it's just sort of my employment record is so spotty that, it's not, and the economy's down. So they're not just breaking down my door to hire me right now, but reasonably certain I'd find a job. And um, he told me a little bit about what he had going on with the wife and all of that. And he had children. He's being a dad and raising his children. And good on him, I guess. I mean, they're here now, so they got to be protected and taken care of, right? And my opinions on making new people it's an opinion. It's really neither here nor there. It's as valid or invalid as anybody else's opinion. My opinion about, and I don't even want to talk about the idea of antinatalism, but once you get into you've lost. If you're starting with the word anti, you probably already lost me, number one, because I'm getting into antithesis, antichrist. I'm probably not going to go too far down the realm of antinatalism, but I'm able to understand the concept at least. And again, every man hath not the same office. It's clearly not in my own path to ever have children. And some would say, "Oh well, maybe someday." It's like, what, I'm gonna make a son out of spite, right? Shoot my last metaphorical wad into some poor woman's womb, sort of a last gasp. Let's make a Benton. Why? To fuck with my family? That'd be my only motivation. Is, well, I can still I'm the only one in my immediate family that can make another Benton that his daddy's a Benton, right? And then I don't watch Game of Thrones. I've never gave a fuck about Game of Thrones, but I posted on my post tab a video break, and it's an AI video, but it's breaking down Game of Thrones, and I find some of those concepts interesting. And I tried to watch. I think I might have watched a season of it when I was drinking, so I don't even remember it really. But I couldn't get into it, which is fine. Not everything's for everybody, but The Wire, that's another one I never got into. But this one's talking about power and the nature of power, and I found it to be interesting enough to shout it out on the tab there. But you get into some of these dynamics, and I think that's why that show probably resonated with so many people, is you do get into those dynamics, whereas, especially as ridiculous as it sounds, the Benton family name and stuff I never gave a fuck about. But I understood from an early age this is a big fucking deal, at least to the family itself. And, I walked into the truck stop earlier and in the process of losing my ID, hopefully temporarily, which I'm on my way back to that same truck stop to hopefully retrieve my ID. But And they sell like reflective hoodies. Well, it's Chicago Bears. And I'm looking at that. Yeah, my grandfather won a fucking championship with the Bears, 1943. It's like, again, now we're back to waking dreams, surrealistic unreality. It's just quite strange, you know, it's quite strange. And I just watched myself pass this guy, and he works for Maverick, who's out of North Little Rock, Arkansas, flatbed company. And I guess they've got these, they record their mirrors, I guess. So he's got his side mirrors, but then he's got two screens. The one of them is kind of the size of a large cell phone. And so I could actually see myself, my rig passing him in that screen. That was kind of interesting. And I think we're seeing a crossroads, which is to kind of change the topic a little bit. I've been talking a lot lately about if I keep doing this job, I'm about to have 20 racks. And then if I keep doing it, it won't be too much longer. I'll have 40 racks. And at that point, I could buy me a truck that would be suitable for the oil field. And I mean the real oil field, the Bakken, not that bullshit West Texas bullshit. And no offense, I haven't worked in any oil field. So anybody that's worked in the Permian Basin, I'm not, I understand there's levels to this. I'm just saying, when I did attempt to join the military, I said, fuck it, we're going bigger, we're going home, we're going Marine Corps, right? Which is kind of a fool's errand, because it's like, you go sign up for maximum psychological indoctrination. I mean, they call it it's literally called new recruit indoctrination, right? When it turns out the Army is basically as physically demanding as the Marines, and almost as long. If you look at the physical side, now I understand it's all fucking, by now it's all watered down and soft. Yeah, sure, but I'm talking about in the 90 or 95, whenever I tried to go in 96. Thank God that didn't take. But I'm just marking time driving this truck, which is fine. But yeah, back to the oil field. If I got 40 racks at that point, it's like I pretty much have to just buy my own truck, drive it to the oil field, start networking. That's really the only part of it I don't want to do, is the networking. I've got the skills. I've just never been interested in networking in that way, And famously, I'm learning that the North Dakota locals, they just don't like people that aren't from North Dakota. And I'm sure that's an oversimplification, but it's like, yeah, sure, show up here and work these jobs. That's fine, but no, you'll never be one of us, and that's fine. But if I go to Jefferson County, Arkansas, I'm one of them. If I go to West Memphis or Memphis, it's like, well, he ain't from here, but he's from a place that ain't too dissimilar to here, Now, what happens when I get to the preaching? Well, that's the fun part, right? So, which way is this thing going to break? Is it going to break to the oil field, or is it going to break to we go preach, bebop around the South? And it ain't hot yet. I got till July. I would say I can sleep outside where I'm from till about and the heat. Sometimes the heat hits early, but once we get into July, it's like, all right, I'm going to lose interest in sleeping outside pretty quick. Although I've done it, I did. I know I did one full summer in Little Rock. And I did at least one summer in Fayetteville, which is almost as hot. It's not quite, but it's almost as hot. So that's 2 summers right there. I had a fucking heat stroke hitchhiking in Arkansas one time. Now, what that was actually, that was natremia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but actually, because of how hot it was going to be that day, I got up early and I knew I needed to panhandle, and then I needed to hitchhike. And I got up real early, and by the time the sun came out, I was chugging water, and I drank too much water. And by the time that sun hit me, man, it's like I had water intoxication and then combined with the effects of the sun. And thank God I got just enough money, and I knew I got to go rent me a room. And thank God they gave me the early check-in, and I just turned on the AC, and I knew I couldn't drink any more water, and I just laid in the bed for the whole day, really. I think at some point I managed to go back out in the heat, and I went and brought a pizza back to the room. Even that, because if anybody's ever had a heat stroke, you know, I was pretty fucking immune to the heat before that. And that really, I'm noticing I'm way more sensitive to the heat after that. I can still be out in it, but I remember out in South Florida, North Central Florida, actually, I took a boot camp class, and we started every class, we would all run, we'd go running, we'd leave the gym and go running to a nearby like high school or whatever that had bleachers, and we'd run the bleachers or whatever. But, I'm competitive, and I wasn't in very good shape. I was in like weightlifting shape, but so within a couple of weeks, it was me and some other guy would always run out in front of, and I'm not a runner. I've been more of I had a little bit of white boy sprinter speed. I ain't no runner, and never have been. And, within a couple of weeks, it was me and a guy who kind of was a runner, and I'd be trying to keep up with him, and he would, he'd give me just enough to beat me, but, he really wasn't. It wasn't no skin off of his nose to beat me to wherever we were going. And that heat didn't do anything to me. I mean, it had no effect whatsoever. And, that ain't, and I'm getting older. I'm 50. That's also, but, I was in my prime. I was in my physical prime when I had that heat stroke. So the point I'm making is I'm probably not going to try to be outside all day, every day. And I can't sleep. It's too fucking hot. You can't sleep outside. I stayed up. Y'all know how much I like to go to bed early. I'd stay up till the sun went down, and then I would make my little camp or my little sleeping spot, and then lay there and not go to sleep, and then maybe doze off by about midnight, maybe. So I was sleeping from like midnight to 3 a.m. if I was lucky, maybe 4 if I was lucky. Because I don't know, it doesn't really cool off. I mean, it cools off a little bit, but it's still humid as fuck all night long. And I find it damn near impossible to sleep in that kind of heat. And I moved into the dorm as a college freshman, and there was no air conditioning in my dorm. And the only thing I remember is we got a fan, and it was fine, except I remember I couldn't fucking sleep. That's all I remember is I just didn't sleep. It wasn't a problem otherwise. You just sweat. I was in my room as much as I wanted to be, and I sweated, and I just recognized when I lay down, I'm going to sleep for 2 hours, and that's just what it's going to be, right? I'm going to sleep and we've stayed up late at that age. I wasn't even 18 yet when I went to, so I moved in the dorm in August. I was almost 18. It was, just shy of my 21st or my 18th birthday when I moved into the dorm. It was hot as fuck, man. I was sleeping from like 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. every day. Maybe get a nap during the daytime. course, it wasn't too long. We figured out my high school girlfriend who went to the same school. She, University of Arkansas, go Hogs. She lived in a girls' dorm. My dorm was co-ed, so of course the girls are good at sneaking in the boys. So I started staying with her, peeing in cups, and every once in a while, if I had to drop a deuce, she'd have to go scope out the bathroom and say, "All right, go for it," and stay and watch. Girls are good at that sort of thing. Girls are way better than us at working together and just sort of respecting each other, and they got their downfalls too. But so I don't know, man. It'll be interesting to see how this thing shakes out. And right about now is when people start getting to work. 7 a.m. Now, at some point, they're going to notice, well, wait a minute. Or will they? I don't know. Will they even, I don't know what they look at as far as my location of my truck. I have no idea. Now, at some point, they might, if they look at last location and it's 2 hours the other way, or an hour and a half the other way, and then they look back 5 minutes later, or however often that system updates, and at some point they're gonna be like, well, how the fuck did he get back down there? So I think I'm 30 minutes out. So I think what I'm gonna do is not tell them anything, and then get to the truck stop, hopefully get my ID back, and then, which I'd say is about a 98% chance, and then let them know what's going on. And I am going to need to use the conveyance because I won't even be able to get there without taking a 30-minute break. So I'm going to at least need to drive 30 minutes on the PC or I'm going to be delayed another 30 minutes. Right now, I got to take a break. And then I'm basically killing my whole clock for today. So they're not going to be happy about that. And whatever they're looking at for my loads, they don't tell me. I have no fucking idea. If I knew what they were likely to assign to me today, I probably would have driven 2 hours back on the PC. I don't fucking know. I'm out here playing a game of incomplete information. And, all this idea of being an owner operator, I don't want to think about the loads. I don't want to think about logistics. I don't want to think about scheduling. I prefer for somebody else to dispatch me. Now, I know I could do that with my own truck too, but that's not the point I'm making. If I had my own truck, I would have to concern myself with how I was being dispatched. At this point, it's like, pretty pleased with sugar on top. Can I go to sleep at what I consider to be a decent hour every night and hopefully not drive through a bunch of rush hour traffic? And, there we go. And it doesn't take a lot for me to be satisfied. And this is not my purpose. I'm not here to do this. Trucking is a means to an end, right? But then I have to ask myself, why are these things happening? Why am I doing 8 extra hours of driving, going to the fucking wrong city for the first time ever? Why am I losing my ID, even if only for 4 hours total, or 5 hours total, before I can retrieve it for the first time ever? Probably, I don't think I've ever lost my ID in my adult life. I'm sure I've misplaced it and just happened to be able to figure out where I left it, and then it just happened to be retrievable. Now, some of this is when I find somebody's wallet or their ID, I do everything I can within reason to return it to them. I even found a wallet in the middle of the sidewalk in San Francisco, and I tried to give it to, there was a shop, a little corner store there. I tried to give it to, he wouldn't take it. He was basically like, well, I don't know what to tell you. And I was like, look, I'm a tourist. I'm not from here. And it's like, I'm not carrying this guy's wallet around with me long enough to find a fucking mailbox to drop it in. So I put it back, I just put it back where I found it. I didn't know what else to do with it. If I could have identified a means and someone say, we'll call the police. Look, man, it's in San Francisco. The police nobody's fucking with a lost wallet. I promise you. Yeah, it's just not a thing, man. And, I halfway suspected there's some weird shit going on in San Francisco. If y'all know about, Manson and that book, Chaos and all of this stuff, you know, the levels of psyops and MK Ultra, when something like that happens in San Francisco, I halfway suspect it's, the work of, again, sysadgents, whether they know they're being used as agents of the system or not, right? It's just sort of a, let's see what he does. And I don't know I have no idea if there was money in it. I think I opened it just enough to realize there was somebody's ID in it. I didn't even explore the contents. It was like, well, this is because sometimes in homelessness you find a wallet, but you look in the wallet and this is just some homeless person's wallet, or which there's nothing in there of value, and there's most likely not an ID. It's just a wallet, or it's somebody got robbed, and this is just somebody grabbed whatever was valuable and just threw the wallet away. I found a phone one time that and returned it to the owner, and it was somebody. Their car was parked in their driveway, and some meth head cruised by in the middle of the night, and their door happened to be unlocked, and who leaves their fucking wallet in their phone in their car? I have no idea. But somehow the phone was in the car. And what's funny is I returned it to them as a homeless person, and I'm pretty sure they were convinced I was the one that stole shit out of their car. And I was just like, look, man, I don't know what to tell you. Do whatever you're going to do. All I know is I found this motherfucker walking down the street in the grass, and I figured if at all possible, I might as well try to return it to you. Here it is. Have a nice day. I don't know what to tell you. It is what it is. Take it. I mean, I don't want it. By the way, I don't want your fucking iPhone. What am I going to do with it? Obviously the criminal didn't want it. They just left it in the grass. They took it and probably realized that they couldn't do anything with it. Or they didn't want to fuck with it. That was in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Hell, I used to take a shortcut through some neighborhood, and people was looking at me all crazy, and I got to talking to some homeowners, and they were talking about somebody stole their bike, and I guess they were halfway thinking, I was like, listen, I don't ride a bike. I don't know what to tell you. Like, we can have the I'm not a thief conversation, but guess what? And that's what every thief's going to tell you. So, yeah, I understand. But like, I don't ride bikes. If you see me around town, you're not going to see me on a bicycle. I bought a bicycle for $15 in Isla Vista, and what I realized is my back ain't into riding a bike anymore. Yeah, it's got its advantages. My lower back said, hey, buddy, you're not a bike rider. I said, fair enough. And that was the last time I fucked with a bike. Actually, someone I thought was my friend gave it to me, or I traded for it, and I sold it to the bike shop for $15 now that I think about it. And hell, it was probably stolen. But what happens is them rich kids, they just leave their bikes on campus for real. And they just stay in the bike racks. And eventually somebody like Henry Hopper, who I was real good friends with, figured he at least didn't used to be a thief. Now he might be by now if he's still living, but he's still in this realm. But he might have became one at a certain point. But he got good at figuring out which bikes had been there so long that wasn't anybody ever coming back for him, and he would liberate the bikes, right? And he never got in trouble for it. He got arrested a lot. Henry got arrested a lot. Not when I knew him, but later on, he got arrested a lot. And really, that's all I can find. All I can ever find about him online. Hell, I got money now. It's almost worth paying a PI, but I suspect he's no longer with us. Both his parents ended themselves in mental institutions. So I don't know if old Henry's still around or not. He was an intravenous meth and opiate user, and you know, and famously, that's why I started going to AA meetings, was because I came back to town one time and found Henry and said, "Hey, man, where can I find you?" Because I know that world of, I don't know it, but I know enough of that world of the intravenous drug user that he had his little. He's just doing what he's doing, and it's like, if I'm going to see my friend, I'm going to have to get on his schedule to some extent. And he's like, "Oh well, I go to the Alamo Club every morning and go to the meeting, go to AA meeting, and, coffee and donuts." And, I'm like, "All right, man, I guess I'm going to AA meetings." And then I'm the type, if I'm going to go to a fucking AA meeting every morning, I'm going to talk and participate. What's up, Catch 22? I see you down there. So I went for a couple of months every morning to AA meetings and got to spend some time with my friend, and brilliant guy, graduated with honors in art from UCSB, which is known as the big party school in California, but it's actually, it's like probably at the time was like the fourth best public school and public university in California, which has the best, arguably the best, 4-year institution. It has the best system, right? In fact, multiple systems in Cali, of all the states. And yeah, you got the Northeast, you got Boston area, but a lot of that gets into private schools with some public. I think if you go public schools, it's Cali's pretty much on top of that. So number 4 ain't too bad. I mean, you're looking at what's number 1, UCLA. No, Cal Berkeley. My bad. Cal Berkeley, UCLA, one more, and then UCSB. I mean, that's pretty fucking good if you ask me. What would be number 3? See, now that's how my mind works. I got to try to figure this out. UC Davis, maybe. That's a lovely campus. I've spent some time in Davis. I like Davis. Sac's a fucking shithole, but that's Sacramento. I love Cali, man. Cali's wonderful. And I don't think people realize, and I know I'm just ranting and raving and rambling and killing time. And part of this is to sort of avoid the dead flesh tortures of, oh my God, part of me still freaking out over this ID. So thank y'all for riding with me while I go retrieve this ID. But then I'll probably need to leave. Probably need to end the stream at that point, although I may not. We'll see. May have to pause it. But I love Cali, man. And what y'all got to realize, and you don't have to, but what I'd like to stress as somebody who's been all over the West Coast and been all over Cali, half of what you hear in the media is because they don't want you there. They already had the Dust Bowl. They've experienced enough of what they consider to be an Okie. They're over it, right? I mean, for real, they're over it. They don't want you there. Now, yeah, if you want to go slave away, if you want to go get whatever Silicon Valley's looking for, and you want to show up there with your autism, your neurodivergence, and write some code, or do whatever they're looking. But they don't care. You can be a white guy, you can be a white girl. They don't give a fuck. You can be a so-called conservative. Whoever wants to show up and serve that fucking hellscape, you're welcome. But other than that, they don't want you there. Fuck off. Fuck right off. And but not in a bad way. Just these are culturally, California understands that the more middle America doesn't view it as desirable to go to California, the better. And yeah, of course, send us your Lana Turners or whoever, your Brad Pitts, from Springfield, Missouri. I believe that's where he's from. Yeah, send those folks on down, right? And the ones that don't make it will eventually be 50 years old, and then it's next thing you know, it's somebody like Benton, and it's for all they know, came out there 20 years ago to try to make it in entertainment, and I'm still there. And they might as well try to fuck me. I mean, for real. I mean, that was my experience in Los Angeles. Whatever. And I was out early in the morning, and there's a lot of film productions and TV productions in Echo Park area. And it was like 4 in the morning, man, and there were some film production people around, and they thought I was crew, or maybe, and again, maybe they thought I was talent. I have no idea, but all I'm saying is, and a lot of the talent is, good looking folks who, wanted to go into the entertainment industry. And, it's like, hey, what are we going to do? Wait tables? Or some of us will go fucking run cables and, key grip or whatever the fuck that is, right? We'll just go do that. Production assistant, get some credits. And I was like, oh no, I'm a local homeless person. But, he said, hey, I said, hey, I must be doing something right. Meaning, well, if you can't tell that, if I'm getting mistaken for crew, I guess I'm probably doing something right. And he was like, yeah, I guess so. Have a nice day. All right, man. Peace out. I'm gonna keep it moving. Of course, I had my eggs by then. It's like, I gotta bounce, fella. So I guess it was daybreak. Or I was either on my way to get the eggs or on my way back with the eggs. The main mission of the day, acquire the eggs. I mean, at this point, I can basically live on, egg yolks, fucking sardines, beans, right? Pretty fucking easily. A little bit of fruit here and there. Is that, it's not quite John the Baptist's honey and locusts, but not too far off, is it? Although the starches, what I'm realizing about the digestion is the starches are fine. We're talking about the black beans, but at some point, I got to take, if I take like a week off, let the bowels catch up. So I think I'm back to that point. Probably going to transition off the week. And people can say whatever they want about gas. Beans don't give me gas. It's only if because most days I have a serving of prunes. If I have the prunes, and I usually have them after the beans, if I don't wait long enough and I have the prunes too early, I get gas. But if I have my normal meal of sardines, chopped up, pulverized pistachios, hot sauce, onions, cilantro, black beans, ginger powder, nutmeg, no gas. As long as I wait a couple hours before I have them prunes, I'm good to go. And for whatever reason, if I try to have the prunes are a fruit, technically, sometimes I have the prunes after my morning fruit, and that seems to cause that seems to make it more likely to have fatty stools that I used to chronically experience, the greasy, oily, foul-smelling stools. So this idea that beans gives you gas, well, not if your system works properly. Now, some may say, well, beans don't cause constipation. It's like, well, it kind of does in me, but only after a few weeks. But fair enough. Clean that gut out, man. To me, that's about the best gift anybody can give themselves, is to more often than not have a proper BM every day, at least once a day. As often as possible. I don't get no better than that in my world at age 50. It don't get much better than that. What up, USA 308? What's happening, partner? So far, so good with the chat. I don't see any bozo chats. That's good. Yeah, we might keep this going, but like I said, I'm going to need to talk to the company. If I end up on the, I don't know, we'll see how it goes. I'm feeling yappy today. I'm feeling yappy. And what the fuck else are we going to do, metaphorically, to royal us? Not that there is such a thing, but whatever that is, I can't call it. I'll yap until the yapping's done. How about that? They say, isn't that what you always do? Well, yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. But yeah, that's what I would like Middle America to realize about Cali. That half of this idea that the cities of California, it's all human feces and lawlessness, and it's not. Yeah, there's some of that. Guess what? Same thing with Atlanta, Georgia. Same thing. Name a city. Other than maybe Charlotte. There's a few. You ain't gonna find human feces in Fort Worth. You're not gonna find it in not downtown. You're not gonna find it in Charlotte, probably. There's certain cities that we used to call anal retentive. There's places that are a little more anal retentive. You're not likely. Everywhere else, there's human shit on the sidewalk somewhere in the city. I promise you. There just is. And there's homeless people, and whatever. But for me at this point, I just don't see any reason to go to LA without a car. And then San Francisco, you pretty much need money and a car, because I just have no desire to sleep in a car in San Francisco, and it's too expensive to drive back and forth every day just to sleep in a car. It's like, 10 something dollars a day in gas, and then if I park at the BART station, okay, I can sleep in the car in San Mateo, take the fucking BART to San Francisco. That's $11. It's the same as the gas money, right? And all I'm doing is avoiding the pain of parking, right? And having to think about the car all day. Where's the car? What's going on with the car? And here's another thing, man. I left my motherfucking skateboard. Listen to this shit. And I'm getting a skateboard very soon. I left my motherfucking skateboard. I'm absent-minded at times, as we see with this lost ID thing. I am known to misplace my items. So I must have been rearranging the car. I parked my car at the BART at Millbrae BART station, and how it's patrolled is you don't ever see the cops. So it's like, yeah, they got it under heavy surveillance. And yeah, a crazy homeless person wanders through every once in a while, and they know to keep it moving. They don't post up. And every once in a while, somebody like me will come in the daytime, and I'll just sit in my car. When I was still real sick, I'd be there I'd just be sitting in my car every day, just doing nothing, more or less listening to my earbuds, trying to get the cell signal in there, but poor cell coverage. But I left my fucking skateboard on there's a sidewalk in between where the parking spots are, a raised sidewalk. So I backed in and then had my hatchback open. I must have taken my skateboard out, set it on the ground, and forgot to put it back, closed my hatch, and just went and got on the fucking train. Came back, my goddamn skateboard was there. I said, what the fuck? Nobody even touched it. It was there all day. So I don't know, you tell me. I left my door open every single day, parked on the street in Echo Park, one of my car doors. As far as I know, now when I was in there sleeping, the doors were locked. As far as I know, nobody ever went in it. If they did, they put my window shade back where I couldn't tell they'd been in there. I don't fucking know. Don't really care. I mean, nothing in there. Nothing I couldn't just, replace off of Amazon. whatever. My important shit was on my physical person, or they'd really have to go. Yeah, maybe my birth certificate and my social security card or whatever. But they'd really have to fuck me over. They'd really have to be determined to do some digging to find all that. It's unlikely. And even then, they'd have to give a fuck about wandering off with my documents. And even then, hell, I'd have half a chance of just finding them on the sidewalk somewhere. Like, oh, look, there's my documents. Every once in a while, wandering around home, it's, oh, look, there's somebody's documents. And drop those in the nearest mailbox, maybe, or just leave them. I guess leave them there. I don't know what to do with them. Never a dull moment. But anyway, I guess I will end this one now, and then I'll probably do another one once I hit the road. So bye.